there isn't a set way to do it. Most work that excites you is something that's a break from tradition. It will excite you until it becomes a tradition itself, and then you need another break. And I think that's what I foresee for the future of this place, is a kind of perpetual challenging of assumptions.
The question we must ask ourselves is, can we survive the 80s without our leader and friend? It depends, it seems to me, on whether we have learned well enough the meaning of what Angus Boehmer established and guided here, or whether we only knew and loved him without absorbing what he stood for.
See, we go back to the original idea. Angus founded the place because he had a bunch of friends who wanted to do Shakespeare. And that was the reason for that coming into being. The institution that he created was an instrument by which they could achieve the other. You can, if you're not careful, find yourself in the reverse of that. In order to preserve the institution by which we all live, you do these plays, which are safe and sound, and the audience seems to want them. And so you've lost your purpose in what you started out to do by diverting it into something else. And you might as well start over and say, why don't we get out of here and get together with a bunch of neighbors and friends and do some plays so we can have some fun. The institutions, of course, allow you to do things on a much different scale and a much more exciting possibilities, a more regal kind of thing. But if you're just simply going to do the same damn play over and over and over again because you know how to do it, then I think there's a kind of death in that. And artistically, it is it's stultifying, if not deadly.
The plays of Shakespeare survived the man because they carry the great human spirit he must have embodied. They are, in fact, the man. In the same way, we must live in hope that the festival is indeed the embodiment of the artist who guided it, that we are, in some mystic way, the living autobiography of his soul. At this time, there are about 300 people working here, and you only see about 40 or 50 of them on the stage.
Well, upstage, it'll get you in the position a little easier.
Okay. I lost my text again. What do I do?
A moment. Is that actor lingo? Is that actor lingo?
Yes, it's right at that.
Can we take the last section 4? Just slightly lower.
And then out here, you work on how to perform in the rain, how to perform when it's 90 degrees, when the show goes up at night.
Forever may my knee grow to the earth, my tongue cleave to the roof.
Let's take it from the top.
It's like having one of those little 16 square things with the 15 plastic blocks that all have to move around and around.
The whole thing works together, right? Hopefully, in a way that makes sense to the audience. It's all designed for the audience. That's what it's about.
Get in trouble. There's always a gravel.
Mary died.
face.
It's only the performance that counts.
Therefore, we banish you, our territories.
Share with the beauty pleasing.
That hand shall burn a never-quenching fire that staggers us, my person. Exton, thy fierce hand doth with the king's blood stain the king's own land. Mount! Mount, my soul! Thy seat is up on high, whilst my gross flesh seeks downward, here to die. Oh, God.
I want to make a few remarks about the nature of Richard as I see it, and, you know, work out with you today basically the cutting. Please don't take any of these cuttings personally. I know that I'm going to have bargaining sessions with some of you who will say, I need that imagery, I just got to have it, and I don't mind being persuaded that way, but I think I'll start with a somewhat more condensed version. It isn't cut drastically, but it is trimmed. Okay? And now cut down to Mary with the word farewell in length and hours.
Mary, with the word farewell have lengthened hours and in years.
So heavy, sad.
And let it end there. So heavy, sad, ... And the rule was then, when I first arrived here in Ashland, the rule pretty much accepted by everybody is you just didn't cut, you didn't edit. You found a way to play the plays as they are written, because it's assumed that if you cut, you didn't solve a problem, you just eliminated a problem. And so very, very little of the plays were actually cut, and they played them rather rapidly. I think the second time around, at least Angus felt this way, was that having learned all the lessons that you can from uncut work, then there's advantages to cutting in certain spots simply because you get a kind of, quite often, a very obscure passage, which doesn't mean anything to us. Might have meant a lot to the Elizabethans, but we're not Elizabethans, and consequently to put that in there and keep it in, you can solve it in academic terms, but in terms of an audience, it's just something you have to put up with to get to other things. So I've encouraged, and I've done a good deal in my own practice, a judicious cutting. I still think we probably are more loyal to the text than most other theaters, simply because our conditions tend to force that. I've switched around scenes from time to time. I'm doing it in Richard, and try to find out what the scene says, and if you can find a way to say that without, in a shortcut way, we do it. There's also certain words in the text that are just puzzlers. Take, for example, a word like nice. Nice has pleasant connotations to us, but it didn't to the Elizabethans. It meant particular and meant over-particular. So you'd have to almost substitute picky to get nice. And, of course, picky has two syllables, which makes it awkward. But if you really say, she's very nice, in a modern stage, you're doing exactly the opposite of what Shakespeare intended. So I think our temptation now is to try to edit for clarity, edit for power. Now, a tricky cut here. It may not work, but let me try it. So it goes, thy deathbed is no lesser than thy land, and thou commits thy body to the cure. Okay?
As now our flesh is banished from this land, confess thy treasons ere thou fly the realm, since thou hast far to go.
The end of the line. End it with
confess thy treasons?
Mm-hmm.
Confess thy treasons ere thou fly the realm.
And I think that the rhymes by and large contribute to the shape of the play, but they will drive you bananas, or at least they did me. Looked at it and said, boy, those rhymes have just got to go, simply because we're not used to them. But I think that we'll find, I'll tell you a little secret. I've been trying to look at the rhyme stuff that I found particularly difficult toward the end of the play with the Duchess of York and O'Merle and the King and York, and I thought, that can be funny. And so I began to trim out all of the comedy out of it by taking out the rhymes, and then discovered in watching Richard II on television that the scene is funny, and probably intentionally so. So back they went in. Yeah, you did hear that. Away, be gone! And then here you are, all by yourself. What happened to hope? And run. You know. There isn't anybody else to talk to. I noticed that. I don't think that the hysteria that goes all the way through, but there is that moment where she's, I got it, I know what it is. You think he's a bastard, he's not.
Bring me my boots! I will unto the king.
Oh, strike him, O'Merle! Poor boy, the hawk of praise! Poor fellow! Hen, villain, never come in my sight again.
Beat the hell out of him. My boots, I say!
Why, York? What will you not do? Wilt thou not hide the trespass of thine own? Has not my teeming gate drunk up with time?
Turning into an Angus Bonaparte.
And wilt thou pluck my fair son from mine age and rob me?
Artistically speaking, the plays take on a power when they depend upon the language, and you can depend upon Shakespeare as a stage man, a man of the theater. And this will happen to us, I think, as it does any play that I've worked on. Having solved the problems of fixing Shakespeare, you usually return back to the text anyway and discover that he knew better how to handle a scene than you do. And the basic notion there is that you are thrown back upon the resources of the words, because it's words that create the mood and words that govern the action. So I asked Dick to give me an inner above, if you will, that was connected to the lower stage, so that in the down, down I come like glistering Phaeton, etc., I see him come down, 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 down to the bass court, etc., and he never loses sight. I was in a production of Richard II here many years ago, and I always found that very, very awkward. You have this wonderful lyrical outburst from the king, and then all of a sudden he disappears and runs like hell and comes down. You only have about 2 lines to get there, and he always arrived panting, which is not what you want in a Richard II, I think. I don't think that I make as a practice it's not my drive, at any rate, to take a scene and be arbitrary with it, put my mark on it, become obtrusive that way, say, oh yes, I know that's a Jerry Turner play. I undoubtedly do that, but I don't intend to. I was noticing run through this morning that I'm using the floor an awful lot, aren't I? You know, and that may be true. It used to be we had kind of rules that noblemen never touched each other and never crawled around on the floor. It seemed to me that if the king was going to get deposed, to have him crawl around on the floor was a good idea. It's uglier. It may not make any sense to the Elizabethans, but it does to us. There's nothing in the play that indicates what he does with that crown in the deposing scene, for example. Finally decided between Jimmy and myself that he wouldn't give it to Bolingbroke. He'd make him get it, and so we forced him to snatch it, and I like that part. I don't know that that's in a text, but it seems to work. The problem always is to keep it from simply merely being recited. It has to be acted. But what you see in the theater is human action.
Give me the crown. Here, cousin. Seize the crown. Here, cousin. On this side my hand, and on that side thine. Now is this golden crown like a deep well that owes 2 buckets filling one another.
The empty are ever dancing in the air, the other down, unseen and full of water. That bucket down, unseen and full of tears am I, drinking my griefs whilst you mount up on high.
I thought you had been willing to resign.
My crown I am, but still my griefs are mine. You may my glories and my state depose, but not my griefs. Still am I king of those.
Part of your cares you give me with your crown.
Your cares set up, do not pluck my cares down. My care is loss of care by old care done. Your care is gain of care by new care won. The cares I give, I have, though given away. They tend the crown, yet still with me they stay.
Are you contented to resign the crown?
No! For I must nothing be. Therefore, no, for I resign to thee. Now mark me, how I will undo myself. I give this heavy weight from off my head. And this unwieldy scepter from my hand, the pride of kingly sway from out my heart. With mine own tears I wash away my balm. With mine own hands I give away my crown. With mine own tongue deny my sacred state. With mine own breath release all duteous oaths. All pomp and majesty I do forswear. My manners, rents, revenues I forego. My acts, decrees, and statutes I deny. God pardon all oaths broke to me. God keep unbroke all vows that swear to thee. Make me that nothing have, with nothing grieved, and thou with all pleased that hast all achieved. Long mayst thou live in Richard's seat to sit, and soon lie Richard in an earthy pit.
A theater scenery business is unlike any other in the world. We use anything and everything we can get our hands on to try and create what the designers' imaginations have brought forth on paper. It's a large game sometimes to see what material will fill that bill, that sort of ephemeral quality that a designer has that he can't completely express in terms of paper or in terms of words. But once he sees it on stage, says, that's it. That's what conveys the message. The whole intent of technical theater, whether it be lighting, sound, scenic construction, props, costumes, is to help the actors, though, convey the message of the play, to bridge that 8-foot gulf between the stage and the audience. And if, however, a set stands out, if that ephemeral quality that the designer has in mind overpowers the action of the play, then we goofed. It's not a good set. By the same token, if a lighting design or actually a lighting cue or effect causes somebody in the audience to sit up and say, hey, that was tremendous, again, we haven't helped the actor, we've hurt him. Of the various divisions here at the Shakespeare Festival that I personally supervise, as I mentioned, scenic construction.
mountain low, it's high, if anything.
Repertory theater, as I said, is a very complex process and not usually done in the United States for its apparent cost. To design, to build, and to run shows in this fashion takes a set of rules that don't apply to normal theater. Starting with the design process, the designer has to be conscious of the amount of space that he has available, how certain units will break up and still look as though completely solid on stage, what effects are going to be used and how mechanically reliable we can make them. From this point, the designer will then produce drawings for the shop that illustrate his ideas down to fairly fine point in terms of what moldings are going to look like, how units should move. And from this point, the technical director and my assistant, master carpenter, and 5 to 7 shop carpenters will then create this design in whatever materials we've found that will satisfy the designer and also hold up for 10 months. The lighting department, a master electrician with his 5 assistants executing the lighting designer's desires. There are the daily changeovers that have to be taken into account in the lighting designer's mind, how he can best use the minimum number of instruments to achieve an effect, so that in the very limited time between shows that we have, say a matinee to an evening performance, not only can the set be shifted, but also all the lighting changed to suit that particular play's needs, but in the time confines that we do experience.
29, please.
The scenic operations area, which has a supervisor and 10 to 12 people just to move scenery and present the shows in daily rotation. After a time, they get so well trained as to what stores in what position, what moves when, that the crew can take a full Philadelphia mansion and convert it to a Roman street with rock walls and enormous stone flag areas in something like an hour and a half. Word here about repertory theater. This is one of the largest repertory operations in the country. It's sort of repertory with a vengeance, which means that up to 5 times a day scenery is being shifted somewhere in the complex. The Shakespeare Festival has 3 theaters, and the number of permutations that we can achieve at any one time is staggering, with 9 to 12 shows in a repertory. This year for Richard, we were faced with the problem of building a breakaway mirror. This is one that we looked at a number of times before in terms of petrified forest several years ago. We found a plasticizer resin made by Monsanto that gave us a very lovely bullet star effect when tapped on the back side of a sheet of plexiglass, and we would coat the plexiglass with this resin and then had various mouse traps that would spring around with fingers that would tap very quickly the window to simulate machine gun bullets coming across. All very safe, because none of it, there was no bullets, no mess, no muss, no fuss, no bother, except that the stuff is formaldehyde based, which is somewhat disagreeable when you go to apply it to the mirror. For Richard, we went through a number of experiments, primarily Paul Martin, the prop master, discussing it with me, of ways to, first of all, cut up a piece of plexiglass mirror that would fall out properly, yet that didn't work. We tried the plasticizer resin inside, holding the mirror together, and although it worked nicely, it just didn't give the proper dramatic effect that the director was after. Finally, after some experiment, we went back to the plasticizer resin in a fashion where it could be broken out of the mirror and just shatter there on stage.
What we're experimenting with in this case is to get the sense of plate armor, but by using formed leather as opposed to celastic or fiberglass, more conventional techniques. If we are to be somewhat accurate in terms of choice of armor, the kind of armor that would be used here is plate armor, which I find just from a theatrical point of view very disconcerting in a way, if it's made of the usual methods, celastic and so forth. I'm always bothered by the sound of it, for one thing, and I'm also bothered by the inability of the actor to move with any great ease.
One of our costume props people has actually made a mold out of balsa wood to stretch the leather over to make the proper shapes for the chest and the knees and the legs and all these different pieces, so that she had to actually make the mold to stretch the leather over. Then once the leather's hardened and stiff, it will be dyed the proper color and trimmed and decorated, so that all these people are wearing, it'll look like plate armor, like metal. The fitting that they did this morning on one of Richard's earlier costumes was a second fitting for that costume. They'd already done an earlier fitting probably a week and a half or so ago that was just in muslin, where the cutters who had patterned the garment from the designer's renderings and notes from the designer had made certain design choices had been made on the muslin as a mock-up for what the real costume would be. From there it goes, the mock-up is taken apart and used as an actual pattern to cut the fabric that you saw in the fitting. That way the designer, that's her first time to see all the colors that she's chosen together at one time. So at that fitting, the designer has to be present. The cutter has to be there to take care of the fit problems and any patterning problems that she may discover now that it's in fabric. Sometimes accessory people are in there to take care of hat things and boot problems and the things that our other areas take care of. Also, there's probably a first hand in there taking notes. A first hand is somebody that also assists in patterning the costumes and also has some cutting responsibilities herself at times. So those are the people that you find in doing the work in the fitting. Then lengths of sleeves are determined, heights of neck, checking to make sure that this curve is correct, that the height is right, and hopefully there are not too many changes. You don't decide that the waistline should automatically have to be dropped. 4 inches would be a pretty drastic change to make in a second fitting. It probably means recutting the whole top of the gown.
The audio department with an engineer and his assistants who work in conjunction with our resident composer who supervises the music for the Green Show and also for the productions themselves.
The musicians mainly come here to perform the Green Show, which is the pre-show entertainment an hour and a half before each outdoor play, and in which we have Renaissance music and dance, vocal music and instrumental music and dance music.
God send us good sail. All hail the stake of ale, here is good ale found. Drink to me and eat to thee, and let the cup go round.
We use live music in some of the outdoor plays. This year it was Love's Labor's Lost, and we used 4 live musicians. And for some of the other plays, like Richard II, we used recorded music, and all of that music was recorded by the festival musicians, for the most part, maybe 1 or 2 local musicians that we brought in. So they not only get a chance to perform music for the Green Shows, but also for the plays, either live or in a recording situation.
Well, the function of the dance in the festival, I think primarily is to entertain people, to enjoy the sight of it before the show every night. But I think people might be reassured to know that there really is a great deal that has been discovered or reconstructed about this dancing in the last 10 years. And there's 3 different kinds of dancing that we're trying to present here. One is very much from the countryside and is basically out of the ritual traditions of very ancient England. And we pair that back to back with Merry Wives of Windsor, which is not at court, it's more a middle class view of Elizabethan England. And then, of course, we do court dancing. There's probably more known about court dancing than anything else because the upper classes wrote about what they did, whereas everybody else didn't. And we pair that with, on back-to-back every night with Love's Labour's Lost, which is very much a court manner show. It's about the nobility and how they behave with each other. And so that sets a mood for that evening of graciousness and some warmth also. And then the country dancing is very much the most English of all of these forms, and that is the social dancing that English people have done for centuries and centuries. And we do that back-to-back with Richard, which is more about England than about anything else, I think. And the country dances are things that really delight us because there is such a remarkable diversity of mood. You go from very somber ritual dances to real fluffy light, you know, playing around with each other. So some very beautiful poetic statements.
The audio department presents a number of problems in achieving a specific effect for a director, in that the language that we have, a very nice language, is more visually oriented than orally oriented, and it's difficult for a director to communicate his desires to the audio people in terms of an effect. An example of this is for Coriolanus. Jerry Turner wanted the sound of 10,000 arrows flitting through the air. And after several missed attempts and whatnot, the guys came up with the idea of dropping a piece of hot steel into a bucket and running it backwards on the tape recorder at the same time as slowing it down quite a bit. And this came close to what the director wanted and was suitable for use in the theater. For Mice and Men, there's a sequence where the ranch hands are playing horseshoes behind the barn. And to simulate this game, we went out, found a little horseshoe rink, set up the microphones at either end, and then actually recorded a fairly long game. I forget who won, but just enough tape to, you know, cover the thing with background sounds and, you know, enough to add the ambiance that you would miss off of just a straight recording. This was then taken back to the theater in our production studio and edited to the time needs, the production needs, and produces a fairly convincing horseshoe game.
Now, stage management is a very, very important part of this organization. We have 5, 6 stage managers at a time. We do a number of shows, as people know. We do anywhere from 10 to 12 shows a year, and this is, you know, new productions. And and each one of those shows has a stage manager that is fastened to it, is responsible for, a stage manager is responsible for that production.
These people can come in a half an hour. We won't be getting to right away. Casey Childs, Annette Held, Rob Hirschbeck, John Hewson, Marie Kilmurray, and Paul Duke can come in 1 hour.
Organizing charts. Where do the props go? What is this prop on this side? And if it is on that side, then where does the actor get it? And where does he return it to? And how do we get it? And how do we pick it up? And is it broken? And where do the costumes go? Where do the quick changes happen?
Backstage left are all the swords that we'll be using. Okay? 3 of the swords for Bushy Baggett and Green will be doubled for today. We're trying to find 3 other swords. It also lists what scene you're supposed to wear them in. So make sure you wear them in those scenes and those scenes only.
The buck stops here. And if everything is falling down around everybody's ears, there's only one man that is able to answer for everything, and that is the stage manager.
Ready on sound 13, stand by on sound 14, ready on lights 11. Sound 13, go.
And many times, too, it's up to a stage manager to make snap judgments in the heat of the moment. You know, all of a sudden a leg has broken from a table. You know, what is going to happen? He says, send so-and-so on with a pile of books and get that chair and stack the books on top of the chair and push the chair underneath the table. Goodbye. And the next thing you know, out comes a servant and he goes, you slip, chum, thing goes on. And, you know, to try to assess the situation and try to make a decision and to make the right decision, hopefully, and to try not to impede the show's progress or to draw attention to itself or whatever.
No deeper wrinkles yet. As sorrow struck so many blows upon this face of mine and made no deeper wounds. Oh, flattering glass, like to my followers in prosperity, thou dost beguile me. Was this the face that every day under his household roof did keep 10,000 men? Was this the face that like the sun did make beholders weak? Was this the face that faced so many follies and was at last outfaced by Bolingbroke? A brittle glory shineth in this face, as brittle as the glory is the face. But that it lies cracked in 100 shivers. Mark, silent king, the moral of this sport. How soon my sorrow hath destroyed my face.
The shadow of your sorrow hath destroyed the shadow of your face.
Say that again, the shadow of my sorrow. Let's see. 'Tis very true. My griefs lie all within. And these external manners of laments are merely shadows to the unseen grief that swells with silence in the tortured soul. There the substance lies. And I thank thee, King, for thy great bounty, that not only gives me cause to wail, but teaches me the way how to lament the cause. I'll beg one boon of you, and then be gone and trouble you no more. Shall I obtain
Name it, fair cousin.
Fair cousin? Why, then am I greater than a king? For when I was a king, my flatterers were then but subjects. Being now a subject, I have a king here to my flatterer. Being so great, I have no need to beg, yet ask. And shall I have?
You shall.
Then give me leave to go.
Whither?
Whither you will, so I are from your sight.
Go, some of you.
Convey him to the tower. Oh, good! Convey! Conveyors are you all that rise thus nimbly by a true king's fall. On Wednesday next, we solemnly set down our coronation.
Theater is what happens between an actor and an audience. Now let me try to explain what I mean by that. It's an act of communication in a different sense in some ways than film, which is an action, a human action to be sure, but it is also transformed into a pictorial image, and the image itself has a power on an audience, but it can't talk back. That is, no audience gives any kind of feedback. In the living theater, the action that I've referred to is itself expressive, communicative, and it feeds back.
The audiences color each show enormously. Overall, in terms of matching our energy, if we put something out and we don't get any return back, then we start to reshape a moment and hand it out again. And if there's a good circuitry of energy going, which I think starts with a circuitry on stage to begin with, if that is complete, then the audience really lifts a show. Occasionally there are little things like coughs and sneezes, and if people cough on the word deposed in this play, then I have to reshape a little moment later in order for them to understand. It's just for that one person, you understand, everybody else hears it. In the Bomer, a cougher can wipe out a whole scene sometimes for people. But they do shape the play for us.
The theater doesn't exist, a play really doesn't exist unless there is an audience. You can rehearse it, you can build the props, you can build the furniture, you can build the scenery, you can do the costumes, you can have 1,000 technical rehearsals, you can have 1,000 dress rehearsals, but if you don't ever have an audience, you don't ever have a play.
How do you take a two-dimensional medium like tape or film and talk to people about theater on it?
Well, you don't, probably.
It's that conspiracy that an audience and a group of actors enter into together that creates the play.
I doubt if really talking about it rather makes much sense. It's a little like, talking about comedy. You and I both have listened to a lot of lectures about comedy, and they're notably unfunny. One of the great jazz men, Duke Ellington, I think, says, somebody asked him what jazz was, he says, man, if you have to ask, you won't ever know. And it's a little like that. The theater really has to be its own kind of example. I suppose it amazes me that it can excite me and excite other people as much as it does. Every once in a while, if I get dressed up in a funny costume and have to play a role, I get this awful feeling that you're being awfully silly and childish and a grown person not to be in this trade. But I don't like to think about that very long. But I think that you probably can't any more than you can express music in terms of essays with what you're doing. Trying to transfer the message of one medium into another medium is probably impossible to say. In fact, I would say this, that if somebody is looking for the message of a play, you can articulate that message fairly well in a paragraph, but it isn't the message. The message is that action. That is, Agamemnon comes out of his chariot again and again, always in the present tense, and he is killed. And in that action is the message of the play. It's terrible, it's frightening, it's wonderful, it's thrilling, but it isn't describable. I don't think. You have to go. You can't do it. You can't transfer a play to a film. I don't think. It becomes a film.
Well, what do you think, Mr. DeMille? Mount! Mount, my soul! Thy seat is up on high, whilst I sink down. Cut. Is full of valors of royal blood, and both have I spilled. Oh, the deed were good. But now the devil that told me I did well says that this deed, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Believe me, I'm sorry.
Okay, Norwalk, we'll stay here till 3 with you.
I felt it. I was into it, but...
As you can feel when an audience is with you and when it is not. It's laughing, or it's crying, or it's something else. That emotion is what you're after. And then when I said that I didn't think that a more formalized thing could be theater, what I'm suggesting is that if it becomes foreign to us, it's a language we don't really understand, then it can be very fascinating, but you don't know what the hell they're doing. I think that to me, and it's a kind of a problem in dealing with any of the plays of the past, but to me, the only theater worth going to is the one that hits you where you live, and that is to say, it speaks to your experience. And the deposing of Richard II can be quite a remote historical event that is not in the present tense, but in the past. I think the theater must be in the present tense, has to be doing that now. And so the theater that I'm working toward is a theater that has a way of giving structure, which is to say meaning, to our own 20th century experience. And then it isn't sin so much as it is inadequacy that causes Richard's fall. He simply is not a political animal, except among his favorites and the people that he, by divine right, can choose. But he will substitute for the authority of the barons the games and enjoyment, the sensuality, if you will, of the glory of his position. And hence Bushy, Bagot, and Green, that trio we were talking about last night, really ought to be Bushy, Bagot, and Blue, just to get rid of the cliche. But the substitution of those as manipulators of the state for the authority of the barons makes of the court a court of a weak king surrounded by caterpillars, that's the imagery that they use, which eat at the very heart of the state. It's almost as if Richard Nixon should decide, and he used that same kind of imagery. I was born to reign, he said. If he had substituted his comrades, his buddies, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, what have you, for the authority which is derived in the political state from the wishes of the people. Nobody elected Haldeman. Nobody elected Ehrlichman. The deposing of a monarch, which is the essence of King Richard, substitution of a strong king for a weak one, it seems pretty remote to somebody that lives in 1980 democratic United States. Yes, it really isn't. The usurpation of authority, the overthrow, the revolution, if you will, is with us all the time. I don't know that you can't really, or I would be unwilling to do it, say, in modern dress, because you just don't understand what the heck the king's doing running around with a crown on his head if he looks like a guy that plays tennis. But surely it has overtones with Edward VII, which is in my lifetime at any rate, or more particularly with the deposing, or essential deposing, of Richard Nixon. It's awesome, even how justified it is, how awful the event is, however much one might despise and condemn a person of authority. To throw him out of office jolts the entire structure.
As full of valor as of royal blood. And both have I spilled. Oh, the deed were good. For now the devil that told me I did well says that this deed is chronicled in hell.
I think that if you look at any given theater, they are fairly short-lived in vitality. Now, there are theaters that have been there for an awful long time, like the Old Vic and the Comédie Française. But by and large, the lifetime of a theater is about the lifetime of a single man. Shakespeare's theater was about that length of time. And I think that if you want to look beyond that, if you want to find some kind of permanence, an institution, if you will, then you have to find ways in which that institution can adapt itself to new conditions and new impulses and new streams. And so in some respects, we're an anachronism. We're carrying on a tradition here that goes back to 1935. And the only thing that really has kept us vital is that there's a kind of constant sense of change within that frame. It may be subtle and it may be a long-ranging thing, but it's essentially revolutionary. Building of the Bomer Theater was a revolution.
Since the Bomer Theater is open, we have done other things other than Shakespeare. And even before that time, before the Bomer opened, we did other things than Shakespeare. We did other Elizabethans. We did Ben Jonson, we did Beaumont and Fletcher, we did Webster. We did those sorts of things too, and we have done those since. But the nice thing about having the Bomer Theater, and about having this theater also, the Black Swan, is to be able to branch out into other types of theater, the kinds of theater that do not fit in the Elizabethan theater, and to have, pardon me, this theater, this Black Swan Theater, to be able to do shows in here that do not necessarily fit in the Bomer Theater, in that kind of arrangement, that many seats, that distance. In here, we're very, very close. This is, I call this the spit-on-'em theater. I mean, people who right all the way around, just wrapped around very, very closely. They can see you sweat, and they can see all kinds of things about you. You don't have to bark, and you don't have to talk loud in here. You can talk however you want to, whatever the emotion is.
Well, Black Swan, we thought, gave us access, and it did give us access to material that we otherwise would not have produced. We're victims in some respects of our own success. This house out here seats 1,200, the house inside seats 600. It makes everybody a lot happier if those seats are filled with people than if they're not. And consequently, you begin, because of the long runs, begin to select your plays rather carefully to be limited to those that you think a fairly large audience wants to see. Well, there's a lot of awfully good material that not a very large audience wants to see. And yet it's very good material. And it's good for us to do that, and it's good for that audience to have a chance to see it. So that by and large, we've tried to select the plays that we do in the Black Swan to those that are new and unfamiliar and experimental and sometimes a little naughty. It simply expands our own artistic horizons and those of our audience as well, I think. It makes it an extraordinarily complex enterprise because you're really running 3 theaters with a single company. It means your company's got to be awfully large, and you have to be kind of careful about who can be in what piece. It's an astonishingly rich variety of plays. We've done consistently now about 11 per year, and it gives me the shudders when I think that the 110 plays that a 10-year span is going to encompass. There is among us a dedication, a belief, a faith, if you will, that unites us. And we look forward to that season, not because we'll make it, but because, by God, we'll give it a damn good try.
But I'd like to do the prologue or the opening to the Pyramus and Thisbe scene as Peter Quince, that terribly eager and terribly anxious director of a group of rustics. If we offend, it is with our good will. That you should think. We come not to offend, but with good will. To show our simple skill, that is the true beginning of our end. Consider then, we
We come but in despite. We do not come as minding to content you. Our true intent is all for your delight. We are not here. That you should here repent you, the actors are at hand, and by their show you shall know all that you are like to know.